Welcome to Now We're Getting Somewhere. I'm Katie, and I'm a certified life coach, but I've also been a management consultant at McKinsey and a product manager at a tech startup. In other words, I know what it feels like to have a life that looks pretty good on paper, but doesn't feel as good as I want it to. I help my professional clients develop lives that are more meaningful, happy, and also more successful. And I want to share the same practical insights with you. Let's go. Hello, everybody. My clients know that I often begin our sessions by just asking them how they are arriving. So I will tell you that today I'm arriving a little flustered. I just spent like 20 minutes trying to wrangle with my microphone that I use to record this podcast, and I could not get it to work. So I just decided this is the time I've allocated to record this podcast, and I just want to get it done so that I can move on to other projects in my life. So I'm just going to do it on my computer's mic, and we are going to hope that it is sufficiently crisp and excellent. And I know that you will all understand if it is not as crisp and excellent, that sometimes we just the show must go on. So we're doing it today. On a personal note, I just, I guess late last week, signed my kids up for TK at our local elementary school. And I just feel so excited about it. They have been at different schools for the past 2 years of preschool. One of my kids is in a special education classroom, so he's at like a special ed preschool. The other one is at a regular preschool, and they're going to be at the same elementary school finally in different classrooms. They're twins, so they're the same age, but one of them is in special ed and one isn't. So, but I'm just like, I feel so excited about like being at this one school for like I think 7 years, which is crazy by the time you do TK and kinder and then first through fifth, and I'm just like really excited to be at our local elementary school and have them both there and do drop off and pick up at the same school and have them be able to like see each other at lunch, which I think they'll both enjoy, or, whenever they see each other around school. So just like feeling, grounded in my community a little bit with that. Like even the interaction with like the admin, the administrator at the school, I was like, oh, I'm going to be talking to you, I'm sure, over the years. So anyway, I'm just my heart is feeling a little full with that today. So anyway, that's my personal share for today. So this podcast in particular, I wanted to spend a bit of time answering some questions about the business side of coaching. I have been coaching for a decade now, and my business has grown a lot in that time. And I decently frequently get asked questions about how I grew my business and how I run it now, and also just how I think about the business of coaching. So it's funny because the business side of coaching, the sales and the marketing side of it all, used to be something that I didn't love. I kind of felt like, oh my gosh, I guess it's what you got to do. You got to play the game. And I hear other coaches saying that a lot. But honestly, now at this point, I actually think it's like kind of an interesting part of what I do. It's kind of fun. And I actually enjoy talking about businesses and building businesses, which is a big growth for me. And I will also say that I do like helping other coaches, especially newer coaches, however I can, kind of on this business side of things, because I do remember in the beginning, it felt really overwhelming and, it just wasn't something I was familiar with. But as I said, increasingly, I have started to get, quite a few questions about this business side of coaching from all kinds of different folks. I try to be helpful when I can, but I can't always like hop on the phone with every single person who emails me because I get a decent number of these questions. So I thought it had come to the point where it made sense to probably just put together a podcast episode where I try to answer as many questions as I can, which I can sort of give out as a resource for folks now and in the future. So if you have any questions that I don't answer on this podcast, I will also leave a link in the show notes and you can enter questions there, and I'll try to kind of keep track of questions, and I'll do another episode in a year or two, or like whenever there are enough questions. So as I said, this will be a Q&A episode, but before I do that, I figure it probably makes sense to do like a short summary about the state of my business. I tend to presume that most people listening to this are just my regular community, so they already know me, but I do think this episode might get shared to at least some folks, and maybe you don't know me at all. So I'm Katie. I am a life coach. I would consider myself a generalist life coach. I've been coaching for about a decade now. I did have a niche in the beginning of that time, which I'll speak about more as we go. But now I would really consider myself a generalist. I have done some work with groups over the years, but really more than 95% of my work has been, and especially now, is one-on-one coaching. That's really the lion's share of what I do. I am a little private, so I won't share exact numbers about my business, but I will say at this point, my net income is about equivalent to like a senior software developer, like about someone my age who codes. And I think that's incredible because I get to be a life coach and I get to sort of make that living. And in addition, I have quite a bit of flexibility. I typically work, fewer than about 25 hours a week, though they are often pretty intense focused hours. Like on Fridays, I have the flexibility to spend a whole morning at like a mommy and me class with my young kids. And I often see friends on Friday afternoons in the sort of late afternoon. So I feel just really blessed to have like a professional income, which is important. I live in Los Angeles, we have a mortgage, all that kind of stuff. But I also get to do work that's really interesting to me, and I get to have like a pretty balanced life. So I feel just really very fortunate. And even though I still have other ambitions for the growth of my business, I have quite a lot of ambitions. Actually, I feel genuinely very pleased with where I am. And I know in particular that me of 10 years ago didn't know a lot of examples of coaches who have the kind of practice that I now have. I literally remember looking around after my coach training and talking to some coaches farther along than me. And it felt like the only options were to, on one hand, maybe be an executive coach, or on the other hand, maybe to sell like these, big online group courses. And kind of neither of those super interested me. And most of the coaches I saw who were generalists, who had one-on-one practices, it didn't seem to me like, even if they were quite experienced, maybe they even taught in a coach training program I was a part of, it didn't seem like they made like a full-time living at it. It seemed like it was more a part-time thing. Maybe they had some other job. So I know that I would have loved back then to hear kind of like the behind the scenes from someone like me who does make a full-time living as a one-on-one generalist life coach. So like I said, I have increasingly felt like I can't necessarily have a conversation, one-on-one with everyone who would like to pick my brain, but I would like to genuinely be of service. So that's what I wanted to do today. I asked for questions from my newsletter community and from Instagram. I got a bunch of great ones, so I just wanted to answer those today. So obviously this episode is for you if you're interested in the business side of coaching. And even if you're not interested in the business side of coaching, maybe you're just interested in like the behind the scenes of it all. I know that I sometimes really love the behind the scenes of it all. And, I don't feel embarrassed about how I run my coaching business. It's not like slimy or salesy or something. It feels pretty authentic and straightforward. So happy to have you here and see what's behind the curtain. So whoever you are, for whatever reason this interests you, welcome to my business and let's go. Okay, so my first question that I'll answer today is from Tristan. Tristan said, can you explain how you got started at the very beginning of your coaching journey? How did you get your first clients? How much did you charge in the beginning? Tristan says, as someone just starting in coaching, it's very tempting to offer my services for very cheap or free, but I find the clients I work with not valuing the service or taking it as seriously. It would be wonderful to hear more about your process in the beginning of getting your first paid clients. So Tristan, thank you so much for your question. I think there's really two questions here. There's one about pricing, like how much I charged in the beginning and my thoughts about kind of like paid versus free or very cheap clients. And then there's a second one about like how I literally got early clients. So I'm going to start with that first one on the pricing side, and then I'm going to talk about how I got my early clients. So as I mentioned, I've been coaching for about a decade. I started with my first client in 2014, I'm pretty sure. In the beginning, like a decade ago, I think I charged about $80 a session in the beginning. There was no minimum, no required number of sessions. I think at some point I sort of said like, please expect at least 10 sessions, but there was no really way to like financially enforce that, or I didn't financially enforce that really. I did at some point, like maybe a year and a half into my coaching, I did a coach training program. And as part of that coach training program, I had to record a certain number of sessions and get feedback on the session. So I think I charged even less for those sessions. I charged like $20 a session for those sessions. And that was really interesting and enlightening to me because what you have pointed to that, not always, but as a general rule, people who get coaching for very, very low prices tend to not take it as seriously or not value it as much. I personally found that to be very, very true. Like the people who paid me $20 a session were the least committed clients I have ever had, period, full stop. Like I had one person who just like disappeared, stopped responding to emails. Another person who lost interest when we were like halfway through also stopped responding to emails, and these were people who had just committed to like 8 sessions. It wasn't this insane number. And I needed to get a certain number of those sessions like during my coaching program that were recorded and whatever. And I was just like literally having trouble getting that done. And that was really interesting to me because these were not my first ever clients. I had been coaching for a bit, like I said, maybe a year and a half, not with a full practice or anything, but I had clients. And for the record, I actually think that's a neat approach to like coach for a little bit before you necessarily invest in a certification program. But I was charging, for those $20 clients, even less than I had previously been charging, because they were for this very specific purpose. And those clients were like so checked out, even less so than my $80 clients, which isn't that much for coaching. And then, over the course of the past decade, as my prices have gone up, my clients, I have noticed, have become more and more invested on average. It's an average, of course. I have had some very committed and invested clients when I charged $80 a session. And I very occasionally, even now, have clients who aren't that invested. But the average in terms of how much they value coaching, how invested they are, and frankly, their results as a result, because more invested clients get better results, it's very, very clear. And I mean, I think both of us know, all of us listening to this know that makes a bit of intuitive sense. When you pay more money, it's something that you think about more. You make sure the coach is really the right fit. You make sure that you really want to work on this right now. And there's a perceived value that's different, right? Like if you take the same sweater and you tell one person that sweater costs $30 and you tell another person that this sweater costs $300, they're going to treat that sweater differently. So, I am not personally a huge fan of free coaching or like super, super cheap coaching, because I think you tend to, in my experience, get clients who like don't really care. If you want to, I think it's fine. I think the world will not end if you're just starting out, you're feeling insecure about your ability to be helpful, and you like do a few free clients, if that kind of helps you get a little bit of confidence. I think it's fine. I would just anticipate that it's decently likely that they may on average be a little flaky. So with that being said, though, I'm not necessarily of the belief that like it makes sense to always be charging premium pricing when you first start. I think if I were advising like a total newbie today, someone who was really doubting their skills, they were nervous to charge anything at all, I think like $1,000 package, it's a nice place to start. Like 8 sessions for $1,000 or something in that range. Maybe it's like $990 or whatever. But, so it's enough that you are asking them to make a financial commitment and a time commitment. And for some people, that is quite a commitment, but it's not like crazy high. And then you raise your rates from there. You don't have to be there forever. Maybe you say I'm 5 clients or 10 clients or whatever at that rate. And then you get comfortable running a consult. You get comfortable that you can deliver results. And then you kind of increase your rates from there. But, for those listening, you probably noticed that I've set a package. It was, for me, a really huge shift in my business in revenue, but honestly, even more so in my clients' results when I started just only doing packages. I have come to believe quite strongly that coaching does take long-term work. And I'm just not a big fan of setting up something where somebody doesn't make a commitment to that work, because I just find they're not going to get results. And then they're much less likely to be happy. And it just is not as good for everyone. So hopefully that answers your questions on the pricing side. Your second question about how I got clients in the early days, I think that leads kind of nicely into a second question I got, which was about funnels. So the second question is from Audrey. Audrey asked, what is your current funnel? And she also said, I'm just starting out and I'm overwhelmed with this idea of drumming up business. Would love to hear your insights. So I wanted to start by just talking generally about how I think about funnels in my business. And then I'll share what components my early funnels have, if you want to call those funnels, to speak to Tristan's question. And then what I do now in terms of funnels to speak to Audrey's question. So first, just take a step back. Depending on what your background is and what content you've been consuming in this kind of like business of coaching space, you might be wondering, what is a funnel? So my definition is that at its most basic, a funnel is just the kind of flow of how someone goes from being a person in the world who has never heard of me to being my client. Many more people might see my website than actually sign up for my newsletter, and many more people sign up for my newsletter than actually hire me, for example. So it's just one way of thinking about kind of like the steps that they pass through on their journey. I don't necessarily personally use the word funnel in my own business. I more just think about it as like a flow or a process, but some people like that term, so I'm happy to use it here. So to me, a funnel is really, again, just this process of someone going from never heard of me to being my client. And for me, that process has 4 high-level steps. So I'm going to explain the steps, and then I'm going to talk about, again, what I used to do at each level and what I do now. So the first step is that they have to find me. This is very, very important. And often, in my opinion, the most neglected step with newer coaches, because people in the world, they have to go from someone who has never heard of me to someone who is aware of my work. They have to kind of enter this funnel, if you like that language. Nothing can happen if they don't find me. So that's the first step. The second step is they have to get to know me. They have to get to know how I think about topics that I am good at coaching on. They have to get to know my overall personality, my way of being. Some business coaches might refer to this as like warming up a lead. So this person was a cold lead. If you want to use that terminology, then when they first found me, they were cold. Cold leads usually, not always, but usually don't buy. So then we have to like warm them up. And how does this happen? Obviously, part of that would be like the static information on my website, like about me and my approach and all of that. But I would argue that even more important than all of that material is all the other content that I create. So I have a blog, I have a newsletter, I have a podcast. I now post regularly on Instagram and LinkedIn. These are all ways that people who are interested in my work can get to know me. And for some folks, this process of getting to know me is a very long process. There are people who hire me after years of subscribing to my newsletter, years plural. And this is not at all uncommon for me. I just want to say that because I think sometimes newer coaches don't realize that this process can be lengthy, and that doesn't have to be a problem, except that, you reap the benefits of this the longer you're in the business. And then, of course, on the flip side, increasingly, as I have more and more materials, I have a podcast and a blog archive and more testimonials and more reviews in the world, I've also found that the process of warming up a lead has often gotten much shorter because folks can now consume quite a bit of my content in quite a short period of time. So I have clients who now hire me, and what will happen is they'll have discovered me, on one day, and then they will binge 8 hours of my podcast in 5 days, and then they'll reach out. So it's just like the time period can really compress itself. And I'll also say, of course, that not everybody is going to consume that much content before reaching out, but often even just them getting to my website and realizing that that level of content exists, that I have that sort of commitment. I've made that commitment to sharing myself and my ideas. Often that warms them up enough that then they reach out. So that's just a second step to sort of summarize. The first one is that they had to find me. And the second one is that they have to get to know me. Or if you want to use that kind of more marketing language, they have to go from a cold lead to a warm lead. The third step is that I have to make offers to help them. So that requires that I have something to sell them. So a coaching package in my case, and that requires me explicitly making offers about, what I sell. So I have to mention that I have coaching packages, available in my newsletter, my podcast, that I'm open for clients if they would like to work with me. I need to have a work with me page that is effective, which is, not easy to do, that describes my coaching offering. All of this sounds so simple, but I have found that there is a lot of skill and artistry to all of these parts of, actually making an offer to help people. And so many small tweaks over the past handful of years in particular have really improved my skills here. So that's the third step. And then the fourth step is that we have to do a consult. So we have to get on a Zoom call and we have to talk about them and, have a really important conversation where I get to better understand what they're looking for and they get to better understand, how I could help them and whether it's a good fit. And again, just like all these other parts, a consult is not just a consult. A consult will hopefully feel effortless and easy to them, but there's a lot of skill that goes into that. And I have improved significantly in my consults, especially again in the last handful of years. So to review, there is 4 steps. They have to find me. They have to get to know me. I have to make an offer to help them. And then we have to do a consult. So I lay all this out, for a couple of reasons. First, because I just want you to be able to see the flow, and my perspective on how that flow works. And second, I lay this all out because I want to explicitly name that I have gotten more skillful, more consistent, just frankly better across the board at all 4 of these steps throughout the decade that I have been doing this, in particular in the past handful of years. I have gotten way better at having way more effective ways of helping people find me. I've gotten way better at warming people up. I've also gotten way better at making offers and running consults. Those 2 in particular can kind of seem like they should be straightforward, but there's so much nuance and opportunity for improvement there as well. And all of that has made such a big impact on my business. So that's kind of like the high level of how I think about this funnel. And then I want to answer the question. So first, what did I do, tactically in the beginning in this funnel? And what do I do now? So first, starting with what I did in the beginning. So starting at the beginning of this of the funnel, how do people find me in the beginning? In the beginning, I shared about my newsletter, in all the places I had like a Facebook account. I shared that. I'm pretty sure I sent like a mass email about it. And then my main strategy for helping people find me was guest posting. So I would write for, at the time, the Huffington Post was like more a thing. So I would write guest posts for that site. And then I wrote also for this website called Mind Body Green, which was a thing at the time. And then at the end of each post, I would do a CTA, which is a call to action. If you haven't heard that acronym, it's basically just like the single action you're trying to get that reader to do. And I would promote this freebie that I had on my website. So it was this quiz that I had made. I mentioned earlier, I had a niche at the time when I first started. I was doing coaching on emotional eating. So there's this quiz that I'd made. It was like, what kind of eater are you? I think it's actually still there at dessertclub.com. I never took down that website, though I'm not active on it anymore. If you want to sign up for my freebie, you can see it. I'm sure it feels kind of janky because it's like a decade old at this point. But so that was what I did. I would write for these websites, and then I would link back to that freebie that I had on my own website. And then when you get the freebie, you're subscribed to my newsletter. So that was mostly what I did to help people find me. And then once they did find me, my newsletter was my main way of warming people up. So obviously I had a website, but a website's not enough in my experience. I'll just say that is one of my top pet peeves when I look at other coaches' websites, when I'm thinking about hiring a coach, because I am a consumer of coaching. And when I'm looking for a coach and I see that a coach has a website, but all they have is an about me and a work with me page, I'm like, that is not nearly enough information for me to feel comfortable spending thousands of dollars with you. What do you believe? How do you approach anything? Unless I have a rock solid referral, which does happen, but unless I have that, I want to be warmed up. Please warm me up. So in the beginning, what I did to warm people up was my newsletter. And then I would also post my newsletter on my website as a blog. So people could also read the archives of that if they weren't newsletter people. So that's what I did in the beginning. I basically guest posted. I had this freebie for people to sign up for my newsletter. And then I had a newsletter. And that was honestly kind of it. I wasn't on social media. I found social media to be kind of overwhelming and tiring. I didn't like spending a lot of time there in my personal time. So I didn't want to have to be there for business. I have had an Instagram account for a long time, but for truly years, I basically never posted. I post once a year or something. And then I did have a work with me page. I made some offers, though not a ton. So, I think even the sort of making offers and consult thing, wasn't as amazing frankly, as it is now. But I do think the one thing that did work for me at the time was just the simplicity. So sometimes when I talk to newer coaches, it strikes me that they're trying to do everything to warm up their clients. They've got a newsletter and a podcast and they're on Instagram. And often I'm noticing that they're not very consistent on any of those strategies because, frankly, it's really hard to be consistent in even one strategy. And it is crazy hard to be consistent on 2 or 3 or 4. And consistency, in my opinion, it's more important than just being everywhere. Because a big part of warming people up, in my opinion, in my experience at least, is them knowing that they can rely on you. They build this relationship with you from knowing that you're going to be there week after week after week. And so that's hard. These people are not consistent anywhere because they're trying to be everywhere. And then because they're trying to be everywhere on the kind of warming clients up side of things, they aren't really doing a ton on the help people find you piece of things. And sometimes they might be well, but I'm on social media and that's discovery. And I would argue that it really varies. Social media can be a discovery platform, but it doesn't inherently function that way. I'll say, if you're just posting on Instagram once a week, in my experience, Instagram will likely not be a discovery platform for you. It might be how you warm people up, people who already like you and follow you, they enjoy your post once a week. But it will likely not be how people discover you. If that's your intention, if you want Instagram to be a discovery platform, you're going to have to do some different strategies. I'll talk a tiny bit more about that in just a second. So I do see a decent number of coaches with these kind of really lackluster or really spread too thin warming up strategies that tire them out. And then they really don't do anything on the helping people discover you side, which is honestly, I think, one of the more time-intensive sides of things. And I think that can be less effective. So that kind of speaks to summary of what I was doing then. Then in terms of how people find me now, I do a few different things. I don't guest post anymore. If I had more time, I would. And frankly, even more importantly, I would actually love to be a guest on more podcasts. That's something like that's kind of on my, marketing to do long list. But again, that's like decently time intensive and it's something that I hope to do more of in the future. But in terms of what I do right now, first, I do have pretty good SEO. So I rank like 2 or 3 for terms like Life Coach Los Angeles or Life Coach California. I'm starting to rank decently high for like some other weird specific search terms like something feels off or lying on the floor. That was something I implemented last year. I implemented SEO in 2024, and that has been pretty useful for me. Like, honestly, I've been surprised about how useful it's been. I'm also on several review platforms. Like I have a decent number of reviews on Google. So like Google Business. So if somebody just Googles like life coach near me, it'll pop up like on Google Maps with those reviews. And then I'm also on Yelp. And again, a fairly significant number of folks find me that way. That's honestly one of those no-brainers that I'm surprised more coaches don't do. So that's an easy win if you are not on those platforms yet. I also do some small targeted ads in a few different newsletters that offer classified ads. So there are some newsletters that I'm aware of that have like a little section at the end where for $100 or $200 let you run like a short ad. I have found those to be pretty worth it for me. There are certain specific ones, not everyone, but there are certain specific ones that has an audience who tends to like what I do. So I do those pretty regularly. I do want to mention that when I do those ads, my CTA, again, this is the call to action, is typically sign up for my newsletter. So what I'm inviting them to do is to sign up for my newsletter. I typically do not say, hey, hire me to be your life coach. I have tried that. I have experimented with it. I have just found that for me, at least, it does not pay very good dividends for me and my business. For me and my business, it tends to be a far better approach to just invite them to get to know me without trying to sell them at all. So I just try to get them to sign up for my newsletter. Or, back when I had a freebie, I would, again, invite them to sign up for my freebie. And I will say, just on a personal note, like, again, making a freebie for my current business is another thing that's kind of like on my marketing to-do list. The long version of my marketing to-do list. And I mentioned that to both be really authentic and to also name, I hope you're realizing when you're listening, like how many things I even have on my own personal list that would be good to do that I don't do yet. And you can have a successful business and not do every strategy that would be good to do. So those are a bunch of things that I do. And then obviously I also get referrals from past clients or returning past clients. And I obviously get more and more of those the longer that I've been in business. And then I'm also on some social media platforms now. I'm on LinkedIn and Instagram. I haven't personally found those to be great for me, at least yet, in terms of discovery. I'm sure that someone has found me that way, sort of hilariously. In the past year, one of my brothers who just wasn't super plugged in to my work because I started posting on LinkedIn, he was like, Katie, you have so many interesting insights to share. So he has gotten surprisingly into it based on me posting on LinkedIn. But so far, he seems to be like the main person I've seen. So that's funny. So basically from social media so far, new people are not yet entering my world that way. I will say social media is like decent for me at kind of warming people up, but they are not, like I said, my lead generation strategies. So as I said, I think if you want to go really hard on social media, it can be lead gen, but I think you have to post more frequently than I do now. So I post like once, maybe twice a week. I think you probably need to post like 4 times a week, maybe even every day. And I think you probably need to implement some more like discovery-oriented strategies. Like maybe you're doing crossovers with other creators or you're doing a lot of engagement on other accounts. I think in accounts that do that consistently over the long term, over the year, over multiple years, I think they will grow. But if you're just like posting once a week on Instagram, which is frankly, again, closer to what I do, then I just think Instagram and any social network is more of a warming people up strategy than a discovery strategy. Obviously, as we talked about, warming people up is super important, but it is not helping people find you. And if you're not doing helping people find you, then people aren't going to find you. So anyway, that's how people find me. And then in terms of how I warm them up, my newsletter is still, I would say, at the core of how I warm people up. It's so funny. I think for a while, I kind of felt like a fuddy-duddy, like still having this newsletter, like social media seemed like where it was at. But then, of course, in the past handful of years, there's been this huge newsletter resurgence. And I continue to feel like owning your own list, like you have those email addresses. Instagram can't just cancel you tomorrow for some arbitrary reason and you lose your audience. I'm a big believer in that. Obviously, I also have this podcast, which can take quite a bit of time to put together. So my typical cadence as a result is like every other week or so, because I just find that I have enough stuff on my plate that I want to make it sustainable for myself. So, again, there's probably plenty of creators out there who podcast, every single week or twice a week or something. So, I have a cadence that works for me in terms of warming people up. And then, as I mentioned, I'm now also on Instagram and LinkedIn on a regular basis. But to be totally authentic with you, I was not able to do that regularly until I got an assistant. Now I have an assistant. She's amazing and she's able to help me. So she helps me kind of like repurpose old content from my newsletters, for those platforms. So all of this, I mentioned this to just say, if you look at me, you might say, oh, Katie has a newsletter and a podcast, and she's on LinkedIn, and she's on Instagram. And you would be right. All of that is true. But I was not doing that when I was smaller. And I think you can totally cross six figures with just like one means of warming people up. That's what I was doing when I crossed six figures as a coach. I really just had a newsletter, and I have kind of like slowly layered on other things like the podcast in the last sort of 2+ years. SEO last year, Instagram, LinkedIn, again, in the past year as I've had more capacity and support. And again, I will also say that something that has been true throughout my business is that there is a bit of like throwing spaghetti against the wall. So in 2024, when I had a little bit of capacity, I implemented SEO for the first time. I found this like online course, and my assistant and I both took that course and we implemented it together. And also in 2024, I got consistent on Instagram and LinkedIn for the first time. And I found that SEO was sort of hugely effective for me. I was honestly surprised how effective it was for me, but I have not yet seen huge returns on LinkedIn or Instagram. So part of 2025 for me is like trying some new strategies on each of those platforms and seeing what sticks. So, for example, I'm going to do Reels in 2025. So I just share that to name that my business is 100% still in progress. I'm still trying to figure, these things out, and some things work well and some things don't. And I, layer on more things over time. So what you see now is me having accumulated a lot of things that work for me over the past decade, but don't, use that against yourself if you're like at the beginning of this journey. Okay. So that is a bunch more about how I got clients then and now. Okay. So my next question is from Mark. Mark asks, what was the ramp up like to get to fill your client slots? It seems like you're running close to capacity with a calendar booked out for several months. How many months/years? Even growth or up and down, slow start, plateaus, valleys, and peaks? And was it more important for you to make calls or build a social media presence? And he gives a little bit of background on himself. He says, my consulting business had 2 months of 0 client/projects, and then the next 2 months brought in one big client with 2 years worth of projects. Now their projects are winding down, and I'm ramping up my marketing, networking with old and new contacts, possible rename, possible website redo with SEO, starting drafts of content articles, and now pushed into actual publishing, looking at joining groups, maybe podcast appearances, a bit overwhelmed, but making daily marketing and business development efforts. Okay, so Mark, thank you so much for your question. A couple of great questions within that. So, you asked sort of about like what my personal ramp up was like. So I'll address that first, and then I'll talk about sort of like, recommendations about what strategies to prioritize as you're building a business. So honestly, for me, my ramp up was extremely long and extremely slow. Like I spent years with basically a partial or half capacity coaching practice. For me, during many of those years, I did have other work too. So I know that's not right for everyone. I know that's not possible for everyone, but for me, it gave me a lot of relief to know that I just had other steady income coming in. So I used to work at McKinsey, which is a big management consulting firm. And they would bring in alumni at times to help with other elements of their interview process. So I did that on the side for a lot of years. And I felt at the time, and I still feel, that I was very lucky to have such a good, frankly, well-paying side job. So I want that context to be, honest. I want to be honest about that. And that kind of gave me a lot of relief as I was growing slowly. I will also say that it's clear to me now that my progression was profoundly slowed down because I had all kinds of thoughts about the business side of coaching and about people who taught about the business side of coaching to coaches. I thought they were slimy. I thought their techniques were salesy. I had all these thoughts and feelings that got in the way of me actually just learning these important skills. So I just say that to say my progression it's clear to me could have been way faster if I hadn't been so judgy about learning the business side of things and so convinced that nothing was a fit for me and it was all slimy and salesy and I couldn't be authentic and have integrity and do those things. It was what it was. And now you are correct. I am at full capacity. I have my slots, booked out several months in advance. So if you reach out now in February, we're going to be talking about, I'm recording this in February, it may not release till March, but we're going to be talking about starting together in May or June. And that is just a really profound privilege that I do not take for granted. But it took long time, like truly, maybe 6 years of maybe like, not full capacity. And then I have been at full capacity for the past like maybe 4 years. So there is variability in that. Sometimes I'm a little later. Sometimes I'm like a little fuller. Sometimes there's a waiting list. And then the last year or so, I have been like pretty consistently like overbooked. Like I have a waiting list, almost all the time. So hopefully that answers your first question about just like how long it took for me to get booked out. And then you also asked if it was like more important to make calls or build a social media presence. I mean, I'm just one person, but to give my perspective, as you've just heard, I basically don't make calls. I don't do cold calls or anything like that. And I have only had a regular social media presence for the last year or so. And as I just shared, it's not really a core part of my marketing at this point. It's still more in the experimentation phase. That's not to say that either of those are bad strategies. They can be great strategies. It's just to say I don't do either of those things, actually. Which leads me to the deeper point, which is for me, my core belief is that everything works from a marketing perspective. Like I truly believe that every marketing strategy you've ever heard of probably works to get you to a successful business. SEO and having a newsletter and starting a podcast and social media and in-person networking or cold calls. I think everything works. It's just about finding a strategy that feels good to you and equally importantly that you can maintain over the long haul. So I will say, just in case it lands with anyone out there, a metaphor that has been super, super important to me that I think about all the time in my business is thinking about the marketing side of my business like this like big Navy ship at sea or this big steam train, and I feel that my job is just to keep the engine on, just to keep like the engine fed with, I don't know, large logs or coal or whatever it is. Like all my job is to keep the engine warm and running and chugging along. Because too many of us, including me at times, let the engine go off. Have I let the engine go off? Absolutely. If any of you know about my story, like I have had a tough couple of years, a lot of worries about one of my sons on the developmental and health side of things. And so there have been times where I just could not attend to my family and coach my clients and maintain the marketing side of things. So like I let the marketing side of things slide, for months at a time. I have my newsletter, which did stick out, but that was kind of it. Like, and frankly, when the engine turned off, it showed in my results. And Mark, I say this incredibly lovingly, it sounds like you have let the engine of marketing turn off for a long time, maybe for 2 years. You mentioned that you kind of like did some marketing and then you got this big client and then you stopped marketing and now you're like, shoot, I need more business. And look, that happens to all of us. But I would offer that it sounds like your thoughts right now are a little frantic. It's like, I need to get everything up and running. Like nothing is working. And I will just offer that my own experience. It has been very useful for me to think to myself, my job is not to sprint right now. My job is just to get the engine of marketing on and warm and humming along in a sustainable way that I can maintain. And if I do that, the results will start to come in and they will start compounding. But I don't need to rush it. I just need to get the marketing engine on and I need to let it stay on. And I need to be a little patient while that happens because the real problem here is that I let it go off. So that is my suggestion in terms of mindset, in terms of how you think about it. I wouldn't suggest worrying about sprinting, but sort of having a calmer, just like get that engine warm and humming along side of things. So I hope that resonates. Okay, so now I have 2 questions from Sarah to answer. Sarah's first question is, do your clients often renew with you to keep working? My coach training set up a model of having clients renew with you forever-ish, and I find that that's just not realistic. How do you handle client turnover? So my honest answer for you, the high-level answer I would have for you is that I plan on pretty high client turnover. Like I don't plan in my business planning on everyone renewing. And if I get renewals, that's fantastic. And I do get renewals, but I don't depend on it. So to be more concrete about my practice right now, I probably have like 4 clients of maybe 14 right now who are renewals. And I get renewals in the short term, like somebody finishes a package and they start the next one right then. And then I also get people coming back who worked with me like 6 years ago or whatever. And I'm sure I'll only get more and more of this as time goes on. But as you can tell with those numbers, again, renewals are not the majority of my client. And I think part of it is that I just have really long client engagements. Most people working with me sign up for 6-month engagements. And, after 6 months, our work is very practical. And the majority of people, not all, but the majority are complete. I will say personally, I love renewals. Like, it's so fun when I already have a pre-existing relationship with a client. We know each other. We're, rocking and rolling. It's so fun to keep going deeper when we have that good working relationship already, but I just don't rely on them as the bedrock of my business. And you asked how I handle client turnover. I guess the main thing I do is I just don't assume that a client is going to renew. It's fun if they do, but I don't expect it. And the nice thing, of course, is that the way that my business is structured, I'm planning on, maybe 20 to maybe 24 new clients in a year. It's not that many. So if I just focus on getting those clients as new clients, if somebody takes that spot who's a renewal, that's great. I just don't expect it. So that's your first question. And your second question was, how do you handle money objections? I love that you have your prices up front. Do you find that people can afford them? Do you target a specific group that can afford them? I've been hesitant to raise my prices, but now that I have a baby and limited time, it feels more necessary. But I don't want to lose the number of clients I have. So a lot of great questions within this one about my pricing and about how I think about who can afford my prices and how I handle money objections in consults. So, the first thing I would offer is that I don't actually get as many money objections as someone might think, as perhaps I would have thought, before I charge as much as I do. I think a big part of that is that my rates are listed on my website very, very clearly. And not only that, I ask on the form that folks submit to reach out about a consult, I literally state my prices again, and then I check with them to make sure that price is okay for them. And then because of all that, my experience has been that if somebody's on a consult with me, they are already, 80 to 90% sold on my prices. Not that they're 100% for sure going to hire me before they get on that call, but they know how much I cost. And they've already basically decided that if it's the right fit, if they think that I can help them in the way that they want to be helped, that kind of help is worth it to them. So that would be my first point. I don't have to overcome huge objections. I'm certainly demonstrating them the value of my services, but again, they're already 80 to 90%, believing in the value of my services. They might just need someone, to help them over the last bit. And just to go on a little side rant here, because I enjoy a side rant, just because you brought up this whole question of prices on my website, it is on a personal level kind of a pet peeve of mine as a consumer of coaching. Again, I'm a consumer. I pay coaches when prices are not on the website, because I think to myself, how much do you cost? Will it be $1,000 to work with you? Will it be $10,000? Will it be $20,000? It really annoys me, because I don't really think sort of conceptually that it makes sense to hide your prices and then only reveal them on the consults. If you were a consumer who was going to buy some jeans and the jeans prices weren't listed, but then they forced you to reach out and talk to somebody live to discover the cost of jeans, not that you would never buy those jeans, but wouldn't you be less likely to buy? I've heard the argument from some coaches that they want to customize their packages to the client. And I think that can make sense in certain kinds of business, like if you were a contractor, if you weren't a coach, if you're a home building contractor. I get why a contractor wouldn't list their rates on their website, because home renovation costs vary a lot project to project. There is so much that varies. But honestly, most of us coaches are not selling a wildly customized package. I sell 2 things. I sell a 4-month coaching package and I sell a 6-month coaching package, and they have a standard price. And by the way, you didn't ask, but just because I'm giving my opinions and everything, I also think that's really powerful, just selling 1 or 2 things and having those 1 or 2 things be really consistent over time so people know what's there, they can think about them. Again, I have people who think about, my packages for months before, sometimes years before they even buy. So, I'm a big fan of just stating your prices really clearly so people can, get themselves 80 to 90% of the way they are on prices before we're even on a call. I find that that is just like very straightforward and upfront. And then in terms of pricing, another thing that has made a really big difference for me is that when I'm on a consult call with a potential client, I try not to be weird about money. I'm going to say that again. Don't say more. So when I'm on a consult call, I try not to be weird about money. So my coach, I have a business coach. She is a dream. I'm obsessed with her. Her name's Dale Sharon. I'll link to her in the show notes. She pointed out to me a couple of years ago now, as we were kind of like debriefing one of my consults, that I never mentioned my rates on consult calls. And when she brought that up, I was like, but you know what? My prices are on my website. Like they already know. And she said to me, I still remember this so clearly. She was like, yeah, I think you're uncomfortable talking about money. And as soon as she said that, I was like, yeah, you're right. And she pointed out that there could be people who weren't saying yes on the call because maybe they like couldn't 100% remember how much they cost, how much I cost. And they felt like weird bringing that up. And then they didn't want to say yes on the call because they wanted to like go back and look at my website and think about it. And basically there would be all this weirdness just for me, being weird about money and like not talking about money in an upfront way. So I started making this point of like really just bringing it up. If I am talking with someone about the logistics of a coaching engagement, like how long it is, how often we meet, everything else, I just make a point of also saying, yep, and here's how much everything costs. And the more that I did that, the less weird it felt. And now I don't really feel weird about it. It's just like a fact. Goods and services cost money. I provide services. They cost money. Like it doesn't have to be weird at all. So hopefully that gives you some ideas on how to help people who already do value your work just get that like little bit more comfortable signing up without necessarily having to like overcome huge objections. So that's the first part of what you talked about. How do I deal with money objections and listing my prices on my website? I also wanted to answer the second half of your question. You said, and I'm going to read this part again just so we all remember. You said, do you find that people can afford them? Do you target a specific group that can afford them? I have been hesitant to raise my prices, but now that I have a baby and limited time, it feels more necessary, but I don't want to lose the number of clients I have. So my first answer is that I definitely believe that people can afford my rates. I am very bullish on the market for life coaching. I actually think the biggest barrier to me growing my business is just that people don't know about me and they don't know what I can do for them. And honestly, that's on me. Like my job is to help people find out about me and then to warm them up by showing them all the insights that I have, showing them about me, letting them get to know me. I have found that lots and lots of people want life coaching and lots of people need life coaching. So you asked, like, do I target a specific group? Kind of, not really. I do sort of target like quote unquote professionals, but I define that so broadly that it becomes not wildly meaningful. Like, I have stay-at-home parents, I have retired folks, I have a lot of people very early in their careers, and not even all of my clients would fall into the professional category. And I talk to some coaches. Again, like I said, I've been talking to a decent number of like early career coaches the past few years, and everyone says to me, oh, it must be only super affluent people who hire you. And that's really not true. Like, do I have some wealthy folks or, quite successful business people who hire me? Yes, absolutely. But I also get folks for whom this is a very significant financial investment. They have thought about this for some time and they have decided that hiring a coach and hiring me in particular is very important to them, and they are going to allocate their money accordingly. Just to give an example, I had a client not too long ago. She works part-time as a Starbucks barista and part-time as an admin in a real estate office. She's not loaded. She doesn't have an inheritance. She's super frugal, super thoughtful about money. And she decided that what she wanted was to work with me. So she paid for it with the money that she earned from those jobs. I have another client right now. She has 3 kids and she and her husband do not make a huge amount of money, even the best of times. But both of them are very light on work right now. And again, she really wanted to do this work and she wanted to do it with me. So she used her savings for us working together. And I also work with folks who are kind of just like more middle of the road professionals. Yeah, they make a living as a professor or a graphic designer, or they work in tech, but they also have mortgages and kids and not like a ton of cash to throw around. But they have decided that this is important to them. they really need the help and they really want the help from me in particular because they trust me because of all that I do to put out all of my ideas to give them help in advance. So they know even before we work together that how I think about things, my approaches, my ideas work for them. So I just want to offer that thought that I believe that there are a lot of people out there that will choose to pay for this. Because just as a sort of a side note, it's not really about a Ford, right? Like I know someone, I'll give a personal story here, who I know for a fact she and her husband together, both pretty successful professionals, probably make close to $1 million, honestly, if not more. I think it's probably more by this point. That was a couple of years ago. And I, several years ago, was talking to her about my rates and she said to me like, oh, wow, that's so expensive. Like she was sort of like surprised that people would pay that much. But her saying that was really just communicating to me that she didn't value that for herself. I wasn't her. She was just sort of showing me, how she would like to allocate her money. So I'm not trying to convince someone who doesn't value this work, who doesn't want this work for themselves to value it. But there are lots of people out there who do value this work and they will choose to pay for it. So that speaks to like the first part of your fear, like, who do I target? Are there people who can afford this? I wanted to also address the second fear that you have that you mentioned that you might kind of like lose some clients that you currently have. So in my experience, because I have raised my rates over time, I have found that this fear is both valid and not valid. So on the valid side, on the true side, there is some reality to your client base shifting as your rates change. And I'll give a personal example here. Back when I did a big rate change quite some time ago, I was worried about it. And my coach, DL, who, again, I'm obsessed with, gave me this really wonderful metaphor of a pop star. I think we were like talking about Beyonce. And she suggested to me, Beyonce started in smaller venues with less expensive tickets. And over time, her venues got bigger and her tickets got more expensive. And are there people who, as that happened, were pissed? Are there people who stopped going to Beyonce's shows? Absolutely. I'm sure of it. There, were people who may have gotten resentful or frustrated, or they thought Beyonce was getting too big for her britches, all that kind of stuff. But on the flip side, were there people who were like, oh, wow, Beyonce's like playing arenas now. Okay, I guess I'm going to go buy that more expensive ticket to see Beyonce at this bigger venue. I'm sure there were those people too. And there's a third category of people, a bunch of people who would love to see Beyonce at this new big arena who she never would have met if she hadn't kind of like up-leveled. So there's all the people. Which is to say, to bring it back to the real life, some people, they will not follow you to those new prices. Some people may even be mad about your new prices. I did have a few examples of that happening in my own business. On the flip side, there are some people who will follow you. I have had people who worked with me when I was charging so little who have followed me over the years and hired me much more recently, paying me thousands of dollars more. And honestly, I think that was a smart choice on their part. Like, I'm a better coach than I was all those years ago, and they got to benefit from that. All that I've learned from both coaching and building a business, it's made me a better coach. So both of those exist. And I will also say that in my experience, it's not always who you expect. Like, it's not like, oh, the people who make more money will follow me and the people who don't won't. Like, it just works in all kinds of surprising ways. And I will also say, again, because I keep saying this throughout this podcast, there are so many people out in the world who need coaching right now, and they would love to hire you if they just knew about you. So I think, if you had a little bit more time and resources, maybe because you're charging more, maybe because you don't need to take on quite as many clients, or you can get a little bit of help because you're charging more, all of that, you might be able to help those new people find you, help warm them up, help them get to know you. And then I'll just offer one more thought as we're kind of closing out this question. One thought that has been super helpful for me around prices and people affording it and all this kind of stuff is I try not to assume I know how people should spend their money. I'll say that again. I try not to assume I know how people should spend their money. I try to give them space to make a decision that's right for them and not assume in advance that, for example, I am too expensive for them. So I'll offer that thought to you too. Okay, and now I have a question from Kathleen. She asked, how were you able to attract clients? Did you have to do mindset work around believing that you could find clients and they wouldn't balk at your rate? So thanks for this, Kathleen. So you're asking about how I attract clients. So obviously, there's an action side, like literally the logistics of how I find clients or attract clients. That's the phrase you used. Obviously, I've spoken about that a bunch so far on this podcast, so I'm not going to do that again. Obviously, I totally agree. There's a huge mindset piece, and I do think that our thoughts play a huge role. So I touched on a few thoughts about my prices. In answering Sarah's question, I have thoughts like, a lot of people can afford these rates. And the biggest issue isn't my rates. It's just that most people don't know about me and they don't realize how I could help them. I have another thought, which is, I try not to assume I know how people should spend their money. So all those I think are really helpful. I'll just share a couple more thoughts here that I do think really help me. The first one is that I don't actually think that my prices are unreasonable or out of range for the market, because a little bit of what's been implied in several of these questions so far is something along the lines of Katie, you're so expensive. How do you possibly convince people to pay you that much? And my main thought about this is I don't actually think I'm crazy expensive. I think that given my level of expertise and what I see in the market, my prices are about appropriate. Certainly there are coaches who charge far less, but I also see coaches who charge far, far more and have quite successful practices. My thought is that I have a lot of experience, I provide a lot of value, and I see my prices as appropriate given the market and my experience and what I provide. So that's a thought that I have. I actually think it's pretty reasonable given the market and again, my experience. And then I will also say that part of that comfort, I think, comes from my own attitude towards paying for my own coaching. Again, I am a consumer of coaching in addition to being a provider. And on a personal level, I am willing to pay as much or more than my own rates for my own coaching. And I have paid as much as I charge or more for my own coaching. I believe profoundly in the usefulness of coaching. And my thought for my own life is that finding an excellent coach who's a great fit and really skillful is everything. And I am willing to pay for that always. And the best possible coach, a good amount of the time, is decently expensive. And of course, that makes sense, right? Good coaches, have to have a small-ish practice. They can't be really fresh if they're coaching 40 hours a week. They have to spend money on their training. They have to spend money on their own coaching. That requires money. And, life costs money too. And I think, good coaches are typically doing work on themselves and realizing that if they need money, they need to, work on their business skills. So often a good coach has done that work. So they're kind of more comfortable and more capable of charging a premium price. So sometimes, given all of that, I honestly feel a little curious when people bulk at my prices. What are your own thoughts about paying this much for coaching? If you don't think, certain levels of prices are worth it, why should anyone else? Ooh, I'm just letting that land my body as I say that. And I want to give the caveat here that I want to be careful as I say that. I am assuming that most of you listening to this are coaches, and you may have consumed some content, by business coaches, coaches who coach coaches on their businesses. And there can be a little bit of a thing in that kind of world that I don't love, which is something along the lines of pay me a lot of money and that will fix your money mindset, or something just paying a lot of money, shows the universe that you value coaching and then the clients magically come. And that's not what I'm saying, but I am saying that I believe in the value of coaching. I think what I charge is 100% worth it. And I know that I believe that for sure because I pay for it myself with my own money. So if I'm sitting with someone, I don't have as much drama because I believe it back and forth. So those are a couple thoughts I have. Just to summarize, I believe that I'm charging an appropriate amount given the market. And I am willing to pay this much or more for my own coaching. Those are both thoughts I have. And the last thought that I have is the thought, I am willing to get help to learn how to get more clients. I am willing to get help to learn how to get more clients. This might not be as sexy of a thought, but it's a true one. Because as I mentioned, I have a business coach. I had to, at some point, really decide that I wanted to learn these skills on the business side of things. They did not come naturally to me. And I paid my business coach a lot of money. And she is worth that money many, many times over because I've grown so much from that experience. So anyway, I hope this gives you strength and encouragement if you also want to grow in your business. Again, this can be learned. I hope it gives you a nudge to kind of get some support if you want it or need it. Okay, so now I just wanted to answer 2 more questions that I have been answering a lot when I talk on the phone or I email with people who want to ask my advice about, growing their coaching businesses. And then we're going to close this whole thing out. So first, those two questions that I've been answering like all the time. The first one is kind of about niche. Like, do I have a niche? How did I pick my niche? Do they need a niche? In my impression is that a lot of business building coaches suggest having a niche. So first of all, for me, I would say I don't have a niche, in my opinion. I did have a niche in the beginning. I coached people on emotional eating for years. And then I gradually started doing like both kind of generalist life coaching and then eating coaching. And now I really only do generalist life coaching. Though, sometimes eating comes up and I coach on it, but it's just sort of part of my larger portfolio. I do have like words on a website about who I help. I say things like, I help people whose lives look pretty good on paper, but don't feel as good as they'd like. I talk about coaching professionals, but again, that's really broad. So I would not currently say that I have a niche. I would say that I am a generalist life coach. So as I said, a lot of coaches, early coaches have told me that the standard advice for new coaches is like, thou must have a niche. I'm not a business building coach. That's not my specialty. But as a coach who has built a successful business, I would say, in my experience, there are a lot of people out there who want generalist, non-niche life coaching. There are a lot of people who see the value of generalist, non-niche life coaching. I mean, you need to show them that value. You probably can't just say like, I'm a generalist coach and then everyone comes. But I hate the idea that new coaches would be pressured to find a niche if that's not actually what interests them. I think if you feel called to have a niche, please do it. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I'm just saying if you don't, and I'm just going to give my own practice as N of one, I have found a lot more success without a niche than with one. And I think there's a lot of business here in this world without a niche if you want it. So that's sort of answering the question about niche. And then my final question is just about, honestly, I get this question like a surprising amount. People ask me, who made your website? And the answer to that question is me. I made my website. I made it in Squarespace. I had a friendly acquaintance who is a designer and she did the logo and she gave me like a color palette. We worked on it together. I did have professional photos done and then I made my website myself in Squarespace. I actually personally highly recommend that. I think it's been super nice to have just like full control over my website. And then because I made it, I can, easily tweak it over time. And I just think my website as a result has just gotten better and better over the years, as I think through, what would a person landing on my website need to know? I can add that section because I made the website. I have full control. When I implemented SEO last year, I was able to do it myself, again, because I have full control. And that was really helpful because now I understand the nuts and bolts of how SEO works. So that's the answer to that question. I designed my website. So friends, colleagues, people just enjoying seeing behind the curtain. That's it. I have loved being a coach. I think coaching is good for the world. I think people need more of it. So I hope that wherever you are in your practice, you found something useful or helpful from this episode. I'm also just going to I'll leave a link in the show notes to a page of my website where you can submit more questions if you have them. I think that's probably what I'll mostly do going forward. Like if folks have questions about building a coaching business, I'll just send them to that link. And whenever there's a bunch more questions, I'll just do another episode. But I hope this is helpful. I really did this from a place of wanting to be of service. And even if you're not building a coaching business, I hope it was fun to kind of get a peek behind the curtain of how I think about all this. If you're listening to this, I'm rooting for you. Take care, everyone. If you really want to change in a meaningful, lasting way, that's when you need a life coach. Every client I've worked with has had incredibly personalized reasons why they're in the tired or anxious or stuck or uninspired state they're in. Working with me can help you identify those roadblocks, which are usually blind spots that you genuinely cannot see, and implement a profoundly customized, doable plan for overcoming them. I have a very small, high-end, one-on-one coaching practice. If you'd like to be my next client, reach out at katiesiever.com. I'd love to meet you.